thanks for coming out. There's a lot of you here. Do we have any, my talk is called Developers Are Writing the Script for the Future. So are there any developers here by any chance? Yeah? Whoop. Hey, keep them up. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just say 10. Okay. That's good, because being a software developer is awesome. You're creating the future. And the thing that brings me here is something that we at Stack Overflow feel like we have in common with Pluralsight, is the sense of kind of obsession with developers and focusing on developers because they're writing the script for the future. And that's a little bit what I'm talking about here today. You may have heard this quote from Mark Andreessen, that software is eating the world. And the concept of software eating the world is just it's everywhere. Computers are everywhere. All kinds of things that you didn't expect. I have a toilet seat, a Japanese toilet seat at home that has more CPU power than the Apollo 11 space program. And that's just, it probably has like multiple cores, and I don't know if they're all being used. But it's, it's a nice toilet seat. Does anybody have a Bluetooth salt shaker? Anyone? No? Oh, you guys are from the past. I don't know how you send music to your salt. This is a real thing, by the way. I guess you could use USB. Never mind. So how's it going, writing the script for the future? Is that easy, hard? Is it going very well at all? Any? If you think it's getting easier, raise your hand. Okay, nobody. It's definitely getting harder. It's still possible, though, thanks to abstractions, and I'm going to get into that a little bit in the second part of my talk. And abstractions are this way that we're sort of climbing up onto the list of things that you have to learn after you learn JavaScript on the Pluralsight list. And those are the things that actually make it possible even to create the script for the future. And I just want to talk a little bit about, this is my first computer. Aaron showed that he had the Apple II, because I guess he was like a rich kid or something. But I had to wait like 3 more years until the IBM Pc came out before my dad could finally justify it on the grounds that it had a word processor. And the interesting thing about the IBM PC is that little red switch. That's what's interesting for my talk. That little red switch turned off the power, and it literally disconnected, if you can believe this, the electricity, the electrons had no physical path into the computer after you flipped that switch, which is astonishingly primitive. Like today you have a little button, and you press it, and it just starts running code for like 30 seconds. And it starts sending messages to all kinds of programs that they need to shut down, and it gracefully shuts down the Wi-Fi, and it puts the screen into sleep mode, and it cancels your Amazon Prime subscription, all kinds of stuff so that your computer can go to sleep. But when your computer is asleep, it's still using more electricity than the entire 17th century, but not so much that it'll bother you or keep you awake at night. And that metaphor, there's just a power switch button that has gone from 0 lines of code, and it just sort of creates a kind of a catastrophe for your CPU, to the button that runs all this code in order to do stuff, is the sort of the first part of that metaphor. And let's carry it a little bit further. All kinds of stuff in your everyday life that you can think of that you used to do through some form of direct manipulation, like disconnecting electrons, that you now somehow do, instead of hailing a taxi, you call an Uber. And you call an Uber through software. You don't even look up at what's going on the street. And these little maps appear, and they show you a little virtual car arriving. But there's an actual real car that is doing the same thing. And that's actually kind of amazing, because you've pushed some buttons, and now cars are driving around in the real world. There's a thing that's happened to me lately. Does this happen to you where the Uber driver calls you for I don't know why, which is this whole reason we use Uber is not to talk to people. But the Uber driver calls you. It's like, hey, where are you? And I'm like, I'm at the airport. So like, where do you think I am? At home taking a bath? And then the Uber driver says, okay, I'm coming to pick you up. And you say, I know, that's exactly what the application is for. So anyway, Uber, yeah. So what happens is step 1 is you tell software to do things, and step 2 is then the software goes and makes somebody else do something. And that's really this metaphor of this software soup that we live in, and you can no longer interact with things. Everything that you do is now done by sort of touching some touch panel somewhere, like at McDonald's to order, and then somebody else gets some instructions to do something, to go run around and do something on the other end. So they're being sort of bossed around by computers. When you think about, for example, a modern warehouse, here's an Amazon warehouse. these modern warehouses, and you kind of imagine people wandering around in there all day long with no daylight. Well, that is what's happening. But they're not wandering at random. They have these little computers strapped to their wrists, and the computers tell them exactly where to walk and where to go. And so we've sort of disintermediated. We've now created kind of a computer instruction that says walk to, column 5, and they can't even really think about what they're selling because it's just numbers and it's just packages. It's totally abstract. One of the neat things is that once you get all the software in the middle, is that the software can do all kinds of creative things. It can have an agenda, so to speak. And this is where a neat thing happened at Amazon, is that they discovered that the short people in the warehouses were unable to reach the items on the top shelf. And so they would stop and they would go find a ladder and they would climb up on the step ladder, and entire minutes would elapse with no boxes being packaged. And this was incredibly inefficient. So with a simple software change, they were able to change the software so that anybody who's below a certain height is not asked to pick anything off of the top shelf. And it's just kind of automatic. I guess they connected to some database that had everybody's height. That was interesting. And they did this all with software. And after that, the Amazon warehouses run 0.0001% more efficiently or something, which is amazing. So that's great. So that's the idea of software having an agenda, whatever it is, to make the Amazon factory efficient, to make the Uber car arrive quickly, or whatever it may be. And all that software is created by developers who are sitting there writing code, and that's why, obviously, developers are important. What is this agenda? The efficient warehouse, the efficient transportation. Facebook's agenda is sort of an interesting one. If you've ever seen like a breakdown of how much money all the big tech companies make, Facebook, it's all ads. And Facebook's agenda is really to keep you engaged in Facebook, and their favorite number is that 2 million people use Facebook every month. 2 billion people use, can't even say that, wow. 2 billion people use Facebook. 2 billion people use Facebook every month and look at a lot of ads. And there's just a big machine learning algorithm that's trying to figure out what to show you in your Facebook feed every day. And very little intelligence could possibly go into that because the programmers can't even read all the languages that your feed is written in. So all it is a bunch of machine learning. It's a bunch of algorithms. It's basically some matrix multiplication that figures out what is the optimal thing to put you in the feed. So what are you trying to optimize for? In the case of Facebook, you're optimizing for stickiness, i.e., are you likely to come back to Facebook in the future? Not necessarily happiness, not necessarily being a well-informed citizen of the world, just do you keep coming back to Facebook? And the main signal that they get is that you engage with something, like you click on it, or you touch it, or you like it, or you dislike it. And that particular signal says, okay, well, this is a thing that you find engaging. I'm going to show you more of these because you're going to come back in order to be engaged. But Facebook, unlike Uber and Amazon and so forth, has a very human side to it because it's the way that we connect with our friends. So an interesting story is that once I called up a friend of mine, who I thought was my best friend. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself in this story. And he said, and I said to him, are you doing anything tonight? Do you have any plans for this evening? And he said, oh, I can't really. I'm really busy, and I have to wash my hair, and I have open heart surgery tomorrow, so there's going to be not possible for me to. The next day, I log onto Facebook, and Facebook has ratted him out. And indeed, he had gone to a party, in fact, a party that I had been invited to, and I didn't go to because I didn't know he was going. And now I realize that he isn't really my best friend and doesn't really like spending time with me. Certainly did not have an open heart surgery the next day. And so that's sort of the implication of Facebook is you start to put these little algorithms that are showing you things, and they don't care and they don't know. They just want to know what's going to make you click, I guess. And they get it, if they can get it 4% more correct. This one, it's like, hey, there's your friend and your ex-wife, and you're probably going to enjoy this picture. Anyway, nothing can be done about that. Where were we? Facebook did this study that actually kind of seriously annoyed people. They did a study on, like 600,000 something people. And the study concluded that showing people happy stories makes them happy, and showing people sad stories makes them sad, which does not sound like it could be published in an actual academic journal. So they came up with the term emotional contagion, to refer to that. And I'm not that interested in the study because that's obvious, fifth grader stuff that we should know by now. What I am concerned about is the way people responded to the study they were just aghast. They were like, oh my God, Facebook is manipulating people's emotions for the purpose of an academic study without having gathered the permission of those 600,000 people to participate in a psychological study in which their emotions were manipulated. And I was thinking to myself, what do you think Facebook does all day long? They manipulate your emotions to get you to buy stuff, to see ads. That's all that's going on there as this algorithm is running. So this study is sort of the least of your worries. I'm reminded when I think about, I don't want to obsess too much about Facebook, but I'm sort of reminded that when it came out, remember, is anybody over the age of 100 in this room? No? When television first came out, I'm told that there was a lot of stories about how this was going to be this universal education mechanism whereby people living in all kinds of places like Kenya and stuff would be able to watch television and learn how to do biology or something like that because they would be watching these educational programs. And what television really brought us was Kim Kardashian and Donald Trump. So Twitter also had this moment where everybody said, oh, it's going to bring us these amazing revolutions in Iran and Egypt and stuff like that, and people will democratize through these platforms, through the social media platforms of the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world. And in reality, a weird thing happened is that machine learning algorithm actually put people into little isolation chambers where you only see people whose views you happen to agree with. And it was entirely accidental, and it's a very, very, very strong phenomenon. So people who identify as being, let's say, liberal will really very rarely see conservative things in their feeds, and vice versa. And it's not because of who their friends are, it's because of those algorithms most of the time. And in fact, really all Facebook cares about is righteous indignation, because if they can show you something that makes you indignant, you're going to click on it, and you're going to be involved, and you're going to be entertained, and you're going to want to come back to see what happened. There used to be another term for this when it was done by the state and not by a corporation, which is propaganda, essentially, fake news or whatever you may want to call it. And we used to think it was a really bad thing to have this, but now it's just called social media. I started mentioning righteous indignation because that's really what propels the social networks, and unfortunately, the truth doesn't really matter because the righteous indignation will propel something a lot faster than the correction. There's a little quote here that I made up just now. A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. So go ahead and attribute that to me. I know Wikipedia says somebody else, but it's not. All right, let's get back to software eating the world, and that theme of the software eating the world. And the developers are writing the script of the future. So what do I mean by script? Sometimes I literally mean script, although there's a developer in the room who's going to be like, technically there's a difference between a programming language and a scripting language. We can argue about that. But think of it like a movie script. Here's a thing that I've written, and then I plug it into the computer, and this movie plays like all over the world, whatever the little script is. And then what does the script consist of? It consists of a bunch of lines of code. And each line of code is got in it a whole bunch of little tiny decisions, infinitesimally tiny decisions. And those decisions are made by programmers or by developers, and the developers are, in effect, making an enormous number of decisions for how the world is going to play out and how that script for the future will work. And as it turns out, it's getting really, really hard to create that software. So here's a screenshot from, this would be running on an Apple II, Aaron's old computer. I'm sure he did not get VisiCalc, because that doesn't sound like a thing that a kid would buy to run on their Apple II. But that VisiCalc was the state-of-the-art software program that sold 1 million Apple IIs into Wall Street. And this is what it looked like. And when you look at that screen, it's easy to think like, wow, did they even have floating point? Was that even... there's like 4 columns. There's room for like absolutely nothing on there, and that was that whole program. That was totally amazing. And of that era, you could learn how to program pretty well if you got a PDP-11 computer, which is a big, sort of popular mini computer of that era that cost millions. You could read these 2 books, You could, throw Unix on that thing, read these 2 books, and you knew pretty much everything there was to know as a programmer, down to the smallest detail. And having read them, you're done. They didn't have a need for Pluralsight in that era, because you were done, and you learned these very, very simple things. And in fact, they kind of had to be simple. But if you look at some of the trends, by the way, if you're ever wondering about where technologies are going, go to the Stack Overflow Insights tool. And it will show you, you can just type in keywords, and it will show you sort of whether they're on their way up or on their way down based on visits to Stack Overflow. But the technologies that are growing dramatically are the ones that are these higher levels of abstraction that accomplish sort of amazing things for you. So imagine today, when you want to build something, whatever the kind of app it may be, you may be throwing a map there. If you want to have a map, you can use the Google Maps API, and an entire map appears in your application that, this map has everything on it, has 1 million features. It is created by satellites in space and cars that drive around all day long. The billions and billions of dollars of code that you were leveraging when you put 3 lines of Google Maps code into your app is relatively astonishing. You could throw in, there's all these other APIs. Uber has an API, and when you call a function in Uber, you can cause a car to appear with a driver, not on the screen, like in real life, an actual car. And that's pretty cool. You can use things like Stripe to collect payments. I know that when we first collected payments for FogBugz in the year 2000, it was a 3-week programming project, and we had to open a merchant account and learn about what that was. And you had to have a credit card processor and all this kind of stuff, and you needed to know about CVVs and checksums, and a million other things, which you don't know anymore. The average kid today, 3 minutes and they're done with the Stripe API. This is, by the way, this is about the same amount of code as it would take to show a map, call an Uber, and get the Stripe API code. And what this does, I think, is this is division, if I'm not mistaken, for the CPU that is in an Apple II computer. So if you wanted to divide 2 8-bit numbers, that CPU did not have a division instruction. If you were an assembler programmer, you could not divide. This is the minimum amount of code that you sort of had to write just to do that. As these abstractions become more complex, think about CSS for a moment. Think about, again, how complicated CSS is. And I think some of you may have encountered it at some point in your careers, and how nothing ever seems to work right, nothing ever seems to line up. This slide is just to remind me that if cars were designed by the same people who designed CSS, you would turn left, and it would go left, and you turn right, and the car would go right. But if you tried to go straight, the car would just disappear. Because CSS is just like things appear, disappear, and they never really could figure out how to center things in CSS. And that's what it's like being kind of a programmer. You're dealing with this level of complexity where you're like, wait a minute, why doesn't that work? And the answer requires understanding 800 complicated, deep, and dark things. So that's where you start debugging, essentially. The car disappeared, I start debugging. I put a Google map in my app, and now it's my job to debug that thing. And what does debugging involve? Staring at a bunch of code and saying, well, I got this little thing, and it's called scale control, and I don't really want the user to be able to zoom in and zoom out. So maybe I'll set scale control to false, and you do that, and the user can still zoom in and zoom out, and that is not what you wanted. So now you could sign up for the Google Maps class, or you could buy this book and wait for it to arrive in the mail, and it's 460 pages, and you could read it, and now you know everything about Google Maps, including probably how to solve that problem. But I'll bet that is not what you will do if you were having a little bug in your Google Maps code. What you'll do is you'll go to, what's that thing called? Stack Overflow. And it will turn out that somebody else had this exact same problem, and they discussed it, and there was voting, and there's an answer. And then you can cut and paste that code and see how this problem is solved on Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow essentially has grown to the insane size that it is. 50 million, by the way, there's like 12 million developers in the world, if you want to know, like, technically. If you counted the number of people who would raise their hand and say, I'm a developer. But a lot more people than that are programming or learning how to code or doing it as a part of another job. And we get 50 million unique people visiting Stack Overflow every single month, which makes it one of the top 30 websites in the United States, which is crazy because it's just programmers. It's not even, there's nothing about movies on there. There is on Stack Exchange. So you've all seen how Stack Overflow works, so I'll just whiz through this. But there's voting, and the voting leads to reputation. And reputation is sort of awesome because it's a way to show your Stack Overflow IQ, which is what you know as a developer, and to sort of show it off to the world and show how much you've helped other people, and so on and so forth, and get better. And so what we have on Stack Overflow to disrupt the world of showing what a great developer you are is the developer story. And a developer story is a replacement for the resume that includes stuff that actually matters. What do you know? How have you helped people? What have you built? What skills do you have? What classes have you taken? What books have you read? What books have you written for some of the people in this room? And that's the Stack Overflow developer story, and that feeds into a service that we offer called Stack Overflow Talent, which lets people hire developers based on whatever criteria you want to set up, and is sort of the source of a lot of our revenue over at Stack Overflow. So that's the short story of Stack Overflow. Developers changing the world, we love them, they're awesome, but it's getting really hard to be a developer because of the abstractions. Therefore, we created Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow's motto, which sounds very close to another company in the room, is learn, share, and build. It's all about learning new things, but also about sharing your knowledge with other people by helping them by answering their questions, and then building technology. So before I leave, I just want to make one announcement today, is that in partnership, we're launching a new partnership with Pluralsight today, which will give new Stack Overflow users a Pluralsight account and the option to get 60 days of free, awesome Pluralsight stuff, and vice versa, except that our stuff is mostly free, but technically vice versa. And so we're very happy to announce that, and would love to see a lot more people, because people are on Stack Overflow because they're there to learn. And there's kind of the just-in-time learning that Stack Overflow does, and then there's building the skills which Pluralsight does. So for me, I think it's a fantastic partnership, and we're really looking forward to working with Pluralsight some more. Thank you very much.